Welcome to Best Evidence. My name is John Titus. Today's show is the first in a series about the ongoing financial crisis. We'll begin by looking at how the $700 billion TARP bailout got passed in 2008. To set the stage for that, we're going to hear first from someone who was actually there. I've trimmed this down some. A link to the full speech is below. There's a lot to cover here, so let's get started.
It was September 2008. Things were happening in the financial services industry. Lehman Brothers down, Merrill Lynch down, AIG, whatever. All happened within a matter of days. I call the Secretary of the Treasury and I say, how can we be helpful? What is going on? And he said, it's terrible. We're in a serious meltdown. So they came to my office that night, the Speaker's office, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. We came together and we heard an appalling meltdown of our financial institutions. And I said to the chairman of the Fed, Mr. Bernanke, who was there, Mr. Bernanke, what do you think about what the Secretary said? And he said, if we do not act immediately, we will not have an economy by Monday. We will not have an economy by Monday. By the policies that were in place at that time, we were taken to a place where we wouldn't have an economy. No commercial paper, no economy by Monday.
Okay, everybody on the same page? The chairman of the Federal Reserve told Congress that a horrifying meltdown in commercial paper was on the verge of destroying the entire economy. Not just Wall Street bonuses for 2008, the whole economy. Frankly, that story has gone unquestioned for long enough. And since the media won't do its job, we will, starting with the rather basic question of whether Mr. Bernanke's story actually checks out. I've prepared a short film on this topic which we are going to see right now. For 6 straight years, media pundits have argued over who and what necessitated the $700 billion TARP bailout in 2008. These debates, however, are premised on the notion that the bailout spared the entire economy, and not just Wall Street, from imminent collapse. As we shall see, that premise is 100% false. Main Street commercial paper and credit markets weren't even remotely at risk during the crisis, and Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke knew he was lying when he convinced Congress of just the opposite. Bernanke simply made up the story of the sky falling on Main Street to get Congress to bail out Wall Street. In fact, at the same time he was lying to Congress, Bernanke was secretly plotting a different bailout by the Federal Reserve that was even bigger than TARP. While it targeted the biggest TARP recipients and gave them even more money, it also sent nearly $500 billion to foreign banks. Worst of all, Bernanke's secret program cut out Main Street altogether, even though he was telling Congress that Main Street desperately needed a bailout. He then tried to conceal who got the money, but was shot down by a federal court in Wall Street's backyard. As a result, the story of Ben Bernanke's massive deception comes to us courtesy of the Federal Reserve itself. A few days after the TARP bailout passed, the Federal Reserve published an unusually blunt research paper. The authors addressed 3 versions of the media's basic story of a commercial meltdown on Main Street, calling them all myths. It was these very myths that had just led Congress to pass TARP. The central message of these stories was spillover. As myth had it, the swoon on Wall Street was spilling into Main Street through 3 different conduits: bank loans to businesses and people, bank loans to other banks, and commercial paper, which is just short-term IOUs sold by businesses to cover things like payroll. The Fed exposed all 3 stories as false, with real-time data collected during the Wall Street panic. The Fed released its findings just after October 15, 2008, following a month of pure chaos. The failure of Lehman Brothers a month earlier had set off pandemonium, and within days, Hank Paulson proposed that the U.S. Treasury, taxpayers, pay $700 billion for essentially worthless Wall Street assets. Paulson named his plan the Troubled Asset Relief Program. A week later, Washington Mutual was absorbed by J.P. Morgan, with Main Street fury dominating opinion polls that ran 100-1 against TARP. Congress rejected Paulson's bailout plan. Less than a week later, though, 33 Democrats and 25 Republicans in the House of Representatives changed their no votes to yes, and the TARP bailout passed. It was thus only 2 weeks after TARP became law that the Fed made its stunning revelation that the arguments advanced for passing the bailout had been false all along. With chart upon chart, the Fed showed that Main Street's credit and commercial paper markets never even flinched throughout the crisis. This proved, albeit too late, that every media story about the sky falling on Main Street without the TARP bailout to catch it was completely contradicted by the facts. These stories started with Ben Bernanke, who met with members of Congress to threaten their constituents with Armageddon if TARP didn't pass. Figure 6b pinpoints exactly what was going on. Wall Street commercial paper, shown in red, was in a downtrend but not a crisis, according to the Fed's paper. Main Street commercial paper, by contrast, was rock solid the entire time. While the chart labels Wackovia's demise as the signature event of October 3rd, it was the passage of TARP that day which marked a watershed in American history. There's another key date, though, that the Fed paper left out altogether, and that's Tuesday, October 7th. The yellow band separates that date from Friday the 3rd, when TARP passed. It is on October 7th that we find hard evidence that Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke knew he was lying to Congress. By October 15th, the Fed researchers knew that the Main Street commercial paper crisis was a big myth, and were set to publish a paper saying so. The critical question is whether Ben Bernanke knew his commercial paper story was false when he was force-feeding it to Congress. Once again, proof that he did comes from the Federal Reserve itself. On the 7th, the Fed announced the creation of its commercial paper funding facility. By its own admission, the Fed created this program in response to market turmoil after Lehman Brothers collapsed. The tell that Bernanke knew Main Street was never in trouble is contained in the very requirements of the program. Only major issuers of asset-backed commercial paper with access to the Fed's discount window could participate. By limiting membership to huge financial institutions this way, the Fed shut out Main Street completely. Bernanke freely admitted that access to the Fed's discount window was needed to get in on the Fed's commercial paper bailout. But when it came to who exactly that meant, he told Congress to go piss up a rope.
So all that information is available in our commercial paper program.
And who got the money?
Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
You tell us who they are.
No, because the reason that is counterproductive and will destroy the value of the program is that banks will not come to the discount.
Isn't that too bad?
Actually, what was too bad happened to Ben Bernanke 6 months later, when he got pounded into the sand by a federal judge for treating document requests under the Freedom of Information Act the same way he treated Congress. When details of the commercial paper bailout emerged a few months later, it was obvious at a glance why Bernanke had been so intent on hiding the truth. Most of the recipients were foreign banks. They got $444 billion. Main Street, by design, didn't get 1 cent. Just behind the foreign banks were the very dregs of American financial institutions. The holes in their balance sheets had been so big that the $700 billion TARP bailout hadn't even come close to filling them. The third group included companies like GE, which hadn't gotten any TARP funds but had sucked up whole warehouses of money through yet other bailout troughs, like the FDIC's Temporary Liquidity Guarantee Program. That leaves Ford Credit, which certainly serves Main Street but isn't of Main Street at all. By way of that background, the crisis timeline leaves no doubt about Ben Bernanke's MO when he lied to Congress. The failure of Lehman Brothers on September 15th, by the Fed's own admission, sent it scrambling for ways to shore up the megabanks. As a way of trying to restore confidence, Ben Bernanke could have easily announced, at any time during the frenzy after Lehman, that he was setting up a commercial paper facility. But that would have revealed the Main Street commercial paper nightmare that he was selling to Congress as a fraud, because the very terms of his own facility were limited to megabanks. Had he been honest with Congress, which was reeling from American outrage over the TARP bailout, and told them he was about to launch a megabank bailout program of his own, and that it was even bigger than TARP, Congress would have rightly asked why they should stick their necks out by voting for the most widely hated legislation in American history. So Ben Bernanke waited until 4 days after he scared Congress and got what he wanted all along, and that was TARP. Only then did he reveal the Fed's own commercial paper bailout. Little wonder then that after concealing his plan from Congress and lying to their faces about the crisis, Ben Bernanke tried to hide who benefited from the Fed's bailout and in what amounts and where. The glorification of Ben Bernanke reveals much about the owners of the media and the Fed and about what they really think of Main Street.
Well, it looks like that story didn't check out after all. But at least we have a better idea of why Mr. Bernanke is receiving $250,000 per speech now that he's retired from the Fed. That's all the time we have for now. I'm already over 10 minutes. Let me just say, though, that the response to the first show, Blowtorching, was overwhelmingly excellent and greatly appreciated. I want to reply to some of the comments and some of the criticisms in my email and in the comments down the road, and I'll do that once I figured out the best way. For now, if you like this show's angle, for lack of a better term, give it a thumbs up, let it rip in the comment section, and please subscribe. There's a lot more of this on the way. Thanks for everyone who hit me up on LinkedIn, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.